Welcome to Crossroads Children's Center. Crossroads Children's Center is a fully accredited children's mental health center that provides a wide range of mental health services and supports in the home, school, and community for children and their families up to the age of 12. Crossroads is committed to providing a strengths-based approach to treatment that is evidence-based and responsive to the cultural, racial, and ethnic differences of the population we serve. Children and their families receive services regardless of race, religion, gender identity, physical disability, or other characteristics. We have created a series of videos to help you prepare for your service with us. In this video, you will see some of our Crossroads staff answer frequently asked questions about parenting, and we will also introduce you to collaborative problem solving, which is the method that we use when we work with kids and families. At Crossroads Children's Center, we truly believe that children and families do well if they can. Parenting challenging kids is really difficult. What's important for parents to know?
It's easy to give in to frustration and anger when dealing with the many challenges we face as parents, and it's hard to stay calm and rational when we most need to be. When we're upset, we lose our ability to think, and we might even say and do things that only make the situation worse, and that we end up regretting or even feeling guilty about later. When we parent from that place, things can often go sideways quickly.
Staying calm is easier said than done. What tips do you have for parents?
Try not to take their behaviors personally. Your child is having a hard time, not wanting to give you a hard time. This sounds simple, but it's a big shift in thinking that can have a huge impact. Kids have so much that they're trying to learn about themselves and the world around them. They don't have the benefit of our years of lived experience yet, so they need us to stay calm and show them the way. Even if you're not feeling calm, fake it until you make it. If you remain calm and show that you are in emotional control during a tough time, you will help not to escalate an emotionally charged kid. It is much more difficult to argue with someone who is calm and showing control of themselves. You can do this by modeling what it looks like to cope in moments of frustration and anger. It's important for us as parents to be aware of what helps us to remain calm in the moment. For some, this might be deep breathing, having another adult take over, counting, or maybe splashing water on their face. It's also important for us as parents to be aware of our own triggers, whether it's stress from our current jobs or lack of sleep or memories of past relationships. We need to remember that we're people too. When we're running on empty, we may not have the energy to provide the support our kids need.
What treatment approach do you use when you work with kids and families here at Crossroads?
Collaborative problem solving, CPS, is the treatment approach we use at Crossroads Children's Center, and it comes to us from Think Kids based out of Mass General in Boston. It's based firmly in the philosophy that kids do well if they can. Sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? Although at first glance it looks fairly straightforward, we will see how very different it is from how we typically have viewed challenging children. Old school approaches focused on simply getting kids to stop what they were doing or get them to start doing something we wanted them to do. We didn't care why they were misbehaving, we just wanted them to knock it off. We used to think that kids misbehaved for two reasons. Either they were looking for attention, or they were trying to get out of something they didn't want to do. Essentially, they were choosing to misbehave. They were being manipulative, malicious, and doing it on purpose. We believed that they just weren't motivated enough to behave. And based in that way of thinking, motivational strategies such as rewards and consequences made perfect sense. However, we have now come to understand that kids with challenging behaviors have plenty of motivation to not be that kid. The kid who's often getting yelled at, who's getting in trouble, who's not earning their treats. Which is why I often hear that timeouts and rewards and sticker programs haven't worked. These kids don't need external motivators because that's not what they're lacking. If kids inherently want to please and feel connected to their caregivers, and we believe that kids do well if they can, could there be a different explanation for why a child might be having a hard time? And if there is, would we then still respond in the same way?
Here is Stuart Ablon, Director of Think Kids in the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital, explaining the collaborative problem-solving philosophy.
So, Dr. Ablon, collaborative problem solving, in a nutshell, what is it?
Well, in a nutshell, it's actually a completely different mentality for thinking about who challenging kids are. And when I say challenging kids, what I mean is kids who can be very aggressive or explosive, but also kids who can be implosive as well. We're talking about a wide range of kids who really have a hard time tolerating frustration, problem solving, being flexible. And they respond in all kinds of ways to these challenges that we adults are not so wild about. And the reality is that CPS brings a completely different view of who these kids are and what they need to the table. So it's a dramatic change in terms of what we make of this and, as a result, what to do about it.
So what's the philosophy behind Think Kids and collaborative problem solving?
Well, first thing to say before saying what the philosophy is that it has a philosophy. This is an approach that has a philosophy behind it, which is your anchor when the going gets tough. And the philosophy is very simple. It's kids do well if they can, which is just meant to say if a kid could do well, he would do well. If he's not doing well, something's got to be standing in his way. It's up to us to figure out why, what is getting in his way rather, and how we can help. Which sounds very basic, but when you contrast it with more conventional philosophies, which sound like kids do well if they wanna, it's very different. Because you believe kids do well if they wanna, you're in the business of trying to make kids wanna do well. We know these kids would like nothing better than to be doing well. If they're not, something's getting in their way. Let's figure out what so we can help.
Great.
I understand that CPS has a different way of understanding kids that have challenging behaviors and the belief that kids do well if they can. But aren't there some kids that just want to misbehave and not do what their parents are asking them to do?
These are great questions, and we get them a lot. When we think of managing a challenging behavior, there are a couple ways of looking at it. The conventional, traditional wisdom is that kids do well if they want to. The thinking here is that children misbehave because of lenient parenting or inconsistent parenting, or because the child is just trying to get out of doing something or wants their own way. So how do we deal with kids if this is our line of thinking? We would typically see consequences in the form of rewards or punishments, or even just ignoring the child. Things like sticker charts or removing privileges. More often than not, for the kids we work with, those things work only temporarily and sometimes not at all, and sometimes they make things worse. With CPS, the thinking is that kids do well if they can. So if they are not doing well, whether behaviorally, socially, emotionally, or academically, it is because they don't yet have the skills to do what it is we're asking of them. They aren't doing this on purpose to deliberately and repeatedly annoy us, although it can feel that way. So how do we help kids that don't yet have the skills? The same way we would help a child learn anything new. By teaching them the skills through repetition and practice in a supportive manner. Think about how we teach children to read. When they start kindergarten, the teacher doesn't put the letters up around the room and say, "Okay, kiddies, it's September. I want you to spend 9 months staring at these letters, and in June I'm going to test you and see if you can read." Maybe 1 or 2 children might be able to teach themselves that way, but most are not going to be reading by the time June comes. Instead, we do it step by step. We teach them a cheerful little song with the name of each letter. And then we teach them the sounds each letter makes. And then we teach them what these letters sound like when you put them together. And then we teach them that sometimes these rules don't apply at all and you just have to know some things by sight. And over time and years and practice and support, our children learn to read at the level of fluency that the world needs them to. This is how we build all new skills. And if we take this supportive way to teach our children, they can build the skills they learn to manage life's demands.
Are you saying that I can't use consequences anymore?
Is that a consequence only works when it works. If you have to keep using a consequence for the same behavior over and over and over, is that consequence really working? If a consequence has not been successful in modifying a behavior, could it be that there's another reason why that behavior continues to present itself? Could there be something else getting in the way of your child's success? Research tells us that it's lags in skills that are getting in their way. Areas of language and communication, attention and working memory, emotion and self-regulation, cognitive flexibility, and social thinking. These are going to be explored further in later videos. And if it's a thinking skill that's lagging, It makes sense that a consequence would not help that skill. Systems that are based in rewards and consequences were never meant to teach those complex thinking skills. Essentially, it does not matter how big the reward or the promise is. If the child doesn't have the skills to do what we're asking them to do, they won't be able to do it. Not because they don't want to. I can assure you, the first time my son got on skates, he wanted nothing more than to score a goal. But he couldn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't have the skills yet to do it. What these strategies do teach kids who are struggling is that they're not trying hard enough, and it makes them feel bad about themselves. What we've come to understand is the child who is struggling the most is likely the child who's trying the hardest to get the reward or to avoid the consequence. They're tired of not getting the reward or of being sent to their room. The other thing to consider is the potential impact these strategies have on the parent-child relationship. Again, the most important ingredient for change. If a child consistently is being consequenced or missing out on rewards, essentially being told that they're not trying hard enough, it will have a negative impact on the relationship with the parent or caregiver. One last thing to consider about consequences is that they were never meant to help kids remain calm or regulated. Quite the opposite. For example, when someone is upset and you keep telling them, keep it up and things are about to get worse for you, what usually happens? It doesn't usually help diffuse the situation, nor does it usually jolt the child into compliance. In fact, the exact opposite happens. With our kids, punishments, or the threat of punishment, can increase the exact behavior we're trying to avoid.
How come they can do it when I ask sometimes? I've seen them do it before, manage before. Isn't it proof that this is on purpose?
This is one of my favorite questions. You're right, sometimes we might see a child be able to follow through, and at other times they can't. And this can be frustrating because it leads us to think that they're doing it on purpose. But actually, it tells us that there are times when our child can manage, and other times when the demand outstrips their ability. And I would want to find out why. What's different between the times they can't and the times they can? Having skills is not an all or nothing. It's about being able to access the skill in the moment when we need it. For example, I consider myself to be a very patient person, someone with pretty solid frustration tolerance. Does that mean I never get frustrated? No. I get really hangry sometimes. Hungry and angry. If I had a busy day at work and didn't take enough time to eat lunch, and get home to my kids squabbling about Pokemon cards and calling each other names, and then asking for something every 2 minutes when all I want to do is sit down with them and eat some supper, and then they ask me if there's dessert tonight, I'll probably lose it. It's predictable. Although I have the skill most of the time, the setting or the circumstances make it that I can't access it in that moment. The same is true of our kids.
In this clip, Dr. Stuart Ablon gives advice to parents that have decided to adopt the collaborative problem solving, but that has to deal with other family members that are holding on to conventional thinking. So family members might say that CPS is giving in. It's letting your child win, or the use of CPS, you are spoiling your child. How can you respond to that as a parent? Dr. Ablon has some ideas.
So when observing CPS in action, like in the grocery store, you have a kid having a fit, and it can look and be misconstrued as a parent giving in or giving up too much power to the child. It can make it look like it's a spoiled kid and that the parents have no control and can't do any limit setting. What do you recommend to a parent who takes on this, task of learning CPS and really getting successful with it? They're battling conventional wisdom. When their mother-in-law says, "Stop spoiling that kid," what are your words of wisdom? What can they say?
Well, the first thing to say is you know what your child needs, and you should be guided by what you think your child needs and not by what the person next to you in the produce section thinks your child needs. People who don't live with challenging kids think that the way that they were raised and raise their kids produces a well-behaved kid, which is a bit of an error in logic. Fact of the matter is they probably, luck of the draw, got a kid who was wired well to tolerate frustration and assume that the way they parent is, they caused this kid to get around the world so easily. So you really don't know it until you are a parent of a challenging kid and you realize, oh, if only it were that easy. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that when you are doing what we call Plan B, when you're doing collaborative problem solving with a child, you're not relinquishing any control. You are aggressively pursuing your concern and making sure that your adult expectation and concern gets met. The difference, of course, is that you're making sure that the kid's concern gets addressed too. And if somebody standing next to you by the green peppers thinks that's not the way to parent, so be it. You're going to do what you think your kid needs.
Yeah, that's great, but again, I want to get to that. You know, you have children. You've had 2-year-old tantruming kids. What would you recommend? You're in this heated situation. What's a tagline?
Well, but the heated situation this is the worst time to show anyone what the approach is about, convince anyone that this makes sense. We all look silly in the heat of the moment,
right.
And in public, just even worse, myself included. Get a worked up kid around an adult, we get worked up too. Right. We all lose IQ points, and right. It can get ugly pretty quickly.
Right.
What's most important, though, is after an incident like that, you step back and you say, well, what happened? Mm-hmm. Why did that happen? And what can I do to prevent it the next time around? In terms of helping other people see what this is all about.
Like a little elevator speech.
Well, what sometimes is useful to people is to help them realize that your kid's difficulty tolerating frustration is no different than their kid's difficulty with reading, math, or writing. Mm-hmm. And it requires a different approach in the classroom for helping their kid with those skills that they're having a difficult time with, and yours requires a different approach. And if they only knew what it was like to be you and to try to just let a kid know they're not going to get away with that behavior. You've got a kid with a learning disability when it comes to frustration tolerance. It requires a different way of interacting with them. That being said, it's not until we make a major shift in conventional wisdom that the average Joe is going to understand what you're doing with your kid using this approach. Now, the precedent is there, though. Years ago, we thought dyslexic kids were lazy or dumb. Now nobody would say that.
Okay.
We'll get there one step at a time, and a lot of data to support it, though.
Okay, so if we have to wrap this up with an elevator speech, if I'm understanding correctly. So I'm a mother of a challenging child, and so my mother-in-law is saying to me, you shouldn't be parenting. So I would say, we've learned that these emotional kinds of outbursts or my son's trouble with frustration tolerance is actually a learning disability. And there's a professor at Harvard that's come up with this. So there you go, something like that.
Well, I don't know that letting people know that Harvard professors and Ross Green and myself were involved, I don't know that will get you far. I think what you want to say is, look, just so you know, I've tried plenty of rewards, plenty of consequences. He's not happy about this either. He knows how I want him to behave. The problem is that he has a hard time pulling it off. And here's a couple of the reasons he has a hard time pulling it off that I'm trying to help him with. And you know what? It would be great if you could help me.
Without a doubt, managing a child with challenging behaviors can be exhausting and taxing on your relationship. Parenting is difficult. Admitting this doesn't mean that we are bad parents or that we love our child any less. You're not alone in this, and most certainly not the only one. The purpose of this video was to answer some of the questions we often get from our families about parenting and to introduce to you collaborative problem solving. There was a lot of information shared in this video. If it seems a little overwhelming, don't worry. We will work with you and your family to implement collaborative problem solving in a way that fits your needs and the goals you have identified. As you become more familiar with collaborative problem solving approach, you'll begin to feel more confident in helping your child and gain a better understanding of what they need to be the best they can be. Remember, think can't, not won't. Kids do well if they can, not if they want to. Rewards and punishments don't teach skills. You have taken the first step on your journey to learning collaborative problem solving. We hope it has been helpful. Our next video will provide you with further information, more specifically on lagging skills and how we identify them.